Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to our first episode of Season 3 of Burlingame. It's a small-town podcast sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. This is Mark Lucchese, also known as Mark at the Mic, and Podskis, thank you for a banner 2023. We completed over 30 interviews last year, and thank you for your support. If you like what we've been doing, please go to Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, search Burlingame. It's a small town. Give us a like, make a comment, and please hit the subscribe button. My guest today is often referred to as the Prince of Burlingame Avenue. He has been a longtime resident of Burlingame, residing in the Off-Field building above Copenhagen Bakery. He is a retired professor and administrator at the College of San Mateo and former general manager of KCSM TV&FM. My guest is Professor Michael Kimball. Professor Kimball, thanks for being on the show today.
It is my pleasure. What a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Michael.
And to hear you, too. You've done this before.
A couple of times, yeah.
All right.
And thank you for rescheduling our appointment. We were going to do something in December, but sickness hit the house, and we had to cancel. But thank you for being here today.
I'm sorry that you guys were sick, but I'm happy to be here now.
We're back 100%. So, Michael, how did you get the handle or the nickname or the moniker Prince of Burlingame Avenue?
I have no idea how anything like that would have occurred, except that I'm frequently perambulating that locale, and have been seen since 1968.
It's been since 1968 you lived on the avenue, right?
Yes.
Above, and it wasn't Copenhagen Bakery all the time. It was, I think, Francis Bakery for a while or something.
It was now Copenhagen is two storefronts. Francis Bakery was one of them. The one that is directly beneath my little hovel was at one time a Tallman's haberdashery.
Big and tall.
Yeah.
Big and tall. And then the girls moved in for a while. Morning Glory was
Morning
there.
Glory, that's right. And then finally, when Archie Off-Field, the owner, was required to retrofit the building for earthquake purposes, it was decided to combine the two storefronts into a single location, and Ralph and Ben Nielsen took it over.
Yeah, and had a great run.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, sold, a year or two ago, I think, something
That's
like
correct.
that. So, all right, so you've been living up there for over 50 years.
Yes, for actually 55 years.
And 55, and I've made a few visits there in your apartment, or should we call it a flat or an apartment?
I call it my hovel.
Your hovel, right, okay.
I'm,
is extremely unique, and it's unique for certain things. So can you share some of those things, why it's unique?
I think the most interesting part to most people is the books.
Right, the books.
I don't know why books should have fallen out of favor, but they certainly haven't at my place.
Yeah, how many books, Mike?
Well, there's a storeroom as well.
Right.
There are about 6,000.
6,000. How many line your apartment, though? How many are within the apartment?
Visually there, not in the closets or anywhere else, about 4,000, maybe a little fewer.
4,000. That is amazing. And we'll get to the wine labels in a minute and your art collection, but let's just talk about the books for a moment, because I think it's just incredible. Everybody that goes in there just feels like they're walking into a library. It just feels warm and cozy. Have you read all of those books?
That's a question which a real reader, I'm sorry to say this about you, would never have asked, because, or perhaps it would be necessary. Perhaps it would be necessary to be a mathematician. But if you think about it for a moment, even just the 4,000 would take several lifetimes.
Okay, so how did you accumulate 4,000 books?
However, there is an answer to that question.
Okay,
and
good.
I will give it to you.
Thank you.
It was the answer that Dr. Johnson in the 18th century used to give, and I think it's a very witty one. Johnson was a bit of an egotist, but he was also a very religious man and believed in telling the truth. So people would ask him from time to time, have you read this, Dr. Johnson? Have you read this or that? And his response, he was unwilling to admit that he hadn't read something. So he would say, correctly, "Sir, I have read in it."
Oh, meaning he's opened the book and
That's
just
correct.
read a
He's
passage
at least
or two?
at least
Something.
a sentence.
Would this apply to you too,
And
Professor?
this would apply to me. I've read in them.
Boy, where do you purchase your books?
I've gotten them everywhere in the world, really. One of the very best places to get books is the Burlingame Library, where we are presently situated.
Right.
The Burlingame Library, and especially the San Carlos Library, and San Mateo as well, and I'm sure all the rest, have their own book sales.
Right. So do you come to a book sale?
I don't come to the book sales per se because I don't like being elbowed by the professionals.
Yeah.
And in the past, I have occasionally gotten bruised.
Yeah.
But it's there all, year round.
Do you have a favorite bookstore that you like to go to or you used to go to or anything like that?
I started at City Lights in San Francisco.
Yeah.
When I was a high school kid.
Down on Powell?
On Columbus in
Columbus,
North
that's right.
Beach.
Yeah, Columbus.
And I actually, at the recommendation of one of my classmates, I wrote to them for a book. It happened to be the second volume of the Evergreen Review, because that volume of the Evergreen Review concluded with Ginsberg's Howl, which was a big deal poem in those days among the junior literati.
Yes, good. That's great, Mike. You're starting to get away from me, Professor, but that's okay. I kind of expected that today a little bit. All right. So tell me something. In your books, in your apartment, there are they separated? Are they what's the word? Cataloged by
categorized?
Yeah,
yes,
categorized
they are,
by
definitely.
Fiction, nonfiction,
Oh yes,
author.
Oh yes. If they weren't, they would be lost.
So if I came to you and said, let's find the Adventures of Tom Sawyer, you could pick that up right away?
Yes, I could, because I must. Otherwise, I would spend half my time that I need to spend reading, searching. But there's another thing about books, two things really important to know if you ever have a bunch of them, is that they are of different sizes. And while there is a standard size that you will notice if you look in the new book section of a library, the books over time, paperbacks as well, have different heights. And so if you don't want to have an apartment the size of the Ritz, you're going to have to separate the tall ones from the little ones. Mm-hmm. So there are actually two sets of categorizations for every type of book in or almost all the types of books in my collection, or I should really call it my accumulation. So if I'm looking for Shakespeare, there are two places in my library to find it. The paperbacks are at one that are little short things, are in one place in the bedroom, and the regular-sized books, the trade volumes, as they're called, are in the living room.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Very good. Very good. So, do you have a favorite author or a favorite book? One that you like, this is my go-to book, my favorite author of all time, this is my favorite book of all time. Do you have anything like that?
I guess I'd have to answer that it's the one that I'm reading at the present time.
And which one would that be?
Well, I'll have to tell you why I'm reading it, because it's rather uncharacteristic.
Okay.
I have a book club, and a brilliant member of that book club, Noel Houle, who teaches English at Mercy High School. And excuse me.
That's okay.
And at our last meeting, we were talking about what book to read, and she said, "Well, what do you think?" And I said, "Well, I'll put it this way: if you were interested in entomology, we would." And she interrupted me, and she said, "I am interested in entomology."
Okay.
So I was a bit surprised. An English teacher.
For our listeners out there, that would be the study of insects.
That is so right.
Boy, I luck out with that one.
There are former teachers of yours at Long Beach State who are, at this very moment, not knowing why, they're impelled to leap out of their chairs and dance around the room. And that's why. Yes. So entomology, right. And so she said, "I am interested." And it happens that I had read a review of a book many years ago by E.O. Wilson, who is also known for other kinds of writing, called The Ants, a big compendium about the ants. And so that's what I'm reading.
Mike, I have to I have to say, it doesn't sound like it might be overwhelmingly interesting, or I don't know.
Oh, ants are fascinating.
Okay.
Yeah, surely you know that.
You know what? I don't want to. You're right. I don't want to play dumb. I'll just say that sounds really. What would be the title of the book?
The one that I'm reading, The Ants, is not the one I'm reading. That's a compendium, about 500 pages. He's written a couple of books, additional books that are, you could say, popularizations.
Okay.
And this one is called Journeys to the Ants.
Journeys to the Ants.
By E.O. Wilson.
E.O. Wilson, great. Okay, one of these days, I'm sure I can find it right here in the Burlingame Library, right?
I bet you could.
Terrific. Okay, so thank you. Banned books. What do you think of the banned books? In your collection, would you have anything that would be a banned book?
Sure. In fact, one of the first books I got was Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. I had an interest in that sort of thing when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And I got it at the Newbegin Bookshop in downtown San Francisco, and it was passed to me under the table.
What does that mean, passed you under the table?
They wouldn't acknowledge that they had the book until I told them why I wanted it, and then it was sold to me sub rosa.
Yeah.
They wouldn't acknowledge that they had a copy of it.
Yeah. It was sold to you what? What was that last word you used?
Sub rosa?
Yeah.
Under concealment.
Can we just do that kind of thing? Just regular English here, okay?
Sure, of course.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah.
Of course, I'll do
my
my
very best. I have to
very
get out
best.
my dictionary here and go over this kind of stuff. So,
no, but you did so well with entomology.
We're moving on from the books for a minute.
It's your fault.
Let's talk about that amazing collage you have of wine labels that's in your hallway.
Fun? My mother gave me my dear late lamented sainted mother gave me a 4 or 5 panel, I'm trying to think right now, screen. And it was empty, the screen. And I thought for years, what would I do with this damn screen? And I decided that what I would do, I'm going to make this short. Years and years ago, when you ordered white wine in a restaurant and it was in a bucket, an ice bucket, the mucilage was such that the labels would float off. Do you remember that? You're a man of a certain age.
Yeah. Yes, Mike, I recollect.
It doesn't happen anymore.
Right, it doesn't.
The mucilage is ferocious.
Yes.
And it's very hard to get off. And,
yes.
But in those days, it floated off. And you could take red wine bottles home, which had not been in a bucket, and you could get rid of them. So I started saving them. Who knows why? Well, I suddenly discovered I had 300 or 400 of them. And I had noted on the back, when they dried out, I had noted down who I was with and where I was with when I drank it.
That's incredible, right.
My landlord, Archie Offield of sainted memory, let me use a room in an apartment of his that wasn't occupied for almost a whole summer to decoupage these labels onto that screen.
A lot of work.
And that's what I have.
Yeah.
He also helped me hang it, believe it or not. Anyway, you've seen it.
I've seen it, and I was
It's unusual, isn't it?
I was very impressed with it, yes. And we have to go back to the mucilage for a moment. I would just call it glue.
Oh,
okay?
Sorry. Well, of course, glue is one form of mucilage.
Yes,
But there are other forms, and I wasn't sure which kind is used or was used in Bordeaux in 1960. So I can't really say.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, great.
We try to be precise here.
Yes, we do. Indeed, we do. Are you still collecting labels by any chance, or is it just too hard to get them off the bottles?
It's too hard to get them off the bottles.
Yeah.
It's a damn shame.
Yeah. And the notes you collected, you put them on the back of the label? Did you keep a notebook or anything like that?
I made a notebook as I was creating this monster.
Yeah, terrific.
And I have it. And I can look back and say, that was Jeanette Lescombe at Fleur de Lis in 1973.
Oh, boy. What about your art collection? How many pieces are in the house? It seems like there was quite a few when I saw the apartment.
In frames, there are probably about 30 items.
Yeah.
But it's a small place. So
I know that.
That is a lot.
That's a lot, yeah.
And it happens that my current landlady, the wife of my original landlord's grandson, is a master framer.
Yes.
And so she's framed a lot of the stuff for me.
That's great.
It also happens that next door to me is Marilyn Weeks, a terrific artist, and I've acquired, sometimes as gifts and not always so, a lot of her work.
Yeah. She doesn't do the work in her apartment, does she? Does she?
Oh, yes.
She does?
Oh, yes, she does.
Yeah. I've heard of her, and people have mentioned her to me, but I've never met her.
You should. Next time you're at my place, which I hope will be soon,
yeah,
I'll take you over there. That's where my storage room is, and you'll see it. It's a former dentist's office, and it has a billion little rooms.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And it's perfect for her.
Great. All right, so you've lived on the Avenue for over 50 years. 55 years to be exact?
That is correct.
Right. A lot of changes. You've seen lots of changes. Lots of stores come and go.
So true.
Are there any stores or restaurants that you long for or that you truly miss that
Whenever
you can bring up?
I pass the formerly unoccupied space that is now occupied by one of the mattress companies, the one that housed Bob Gates' haberdashery.
Yep.
I feel a twinge. It was such a lovely place. It was the most attractive retail space I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
It just was terrific to go there, and I miss it.
Did you
terribly.
buy a lot of your clothes there?
I did.
Yeah. I think going back to the Prince of Burlingame Avenue, that's sort of how you got that label. Okay. I met a colleague, a wife of a colleague of yours at the College of San Mateo. And I think he was a former English professor as well. And I only know his first name, Murray or Maury, something like that. Oh,
sure.
Yeah.
Murray.
And I brought up that I'm friends with Michael Kimball. And she said, he's the Prince of Burlingame Avenue.
That's funny.
So it comes to me, though, when I mentioned that I was doing this interview with you today, a few people said to me, is that the stately gentleman that walks very stand-up and wears nice clothes? He's Natalie attired, they said, walking down Burlingame Avenue. And I thought, that's Kimball.
Paid more attention to what I'm wearing today.
That's great.
Mary
so
Fitzgerald.
You were a customer of Bob Gates then.
I was, and I still wear some of his clothes, and he's been closed for 35 years.
Yeah.
I will say to the audience, they'll ask me, so what do you learn in 81 years? I'll tell you what I've learned. Expensive clothes last forever.
Yeah, they hold up for the test of time, don't they?
That's right.
Right. Any restaurants that you miss? Any other stores that come to mind on the Avenue? I mean, there were so many that you've seen come and go.
You won't believe this, but when I arrived in 1968, the fall of '68, there were hardly any restaurants on Burlingame Avenue.
Oh, you know what? Right.
There were bars.
Yep, but lots of bars,
hardly
not
any. There were
a
couple. In fact, that leads us to, if you wish to be led to it, to the Bombay Club, because Bob Gates had no place to have lunch except Toll's, which was a terrific counter cafe.
Yeah,
and Nelson's.
Yeah,
was another place. But as for restaurants, there were very few, and they didn't tend to last very long. So Bob, who wanted to have a decent lunch, started originally in the location, the bank building, I'm sure it was a Bank of America building at the corner of California and Burlingame Avenue that is now occupied by Flights. That was a men's club.
And what was the name of it?
The Bombay Bicycle Riding Club.
Right, but it had nothing to do with bicycle riding, did it?
No. Jim Wood, who was the publisher of the Advance Star newspaper in Burlingame, was part of the organizing group that Bob put together, and they were struggling to find a name. And Jim went on one of his many globe-trotting trips, and it included India. He came back and he said, I have a title for you, Bombay Bicycle Riding Club.
That's terrific.
And they bought it.
Yes, they bought
which
it.
I think is terrific.
Yeah.
Doesn't it say something about those guys?
Absolutely.
I think it's just a wonderful thing. And then it moved to Howard Avenue.
Howard Avenue, right, where I think there's an Asian restaurant there now.
That's right.
Yeah. What can you remember? Like some of the, what was the membership? Was it like 100 members or?
That's a good question. However many there are in here.
Yeah, I wish the viewers.
It looks
could
like
see
about
this.
150 to me.
Professor Kimball's busting out his pamphlet here of the. That's great that you kept something like that.
Oh yes,
that's
terrific. I also have book matches from the Bombay Club.
Yeah. And what went on at the club besides lunch?
The same thing that happened and no longer does either, in San Francisco at clubs like the Bohemian Club, perhaps not the PU Club, but the Engineers Club, the Foreign Trade Club, the Family.
Mike, you have to understand, I've never been to any of those clubs, so maybe you could tell us,
what
did you play?
Modest.
Backgammon or checkers or chess?
They all played dominoes.
Dominoes.
And dominoes was...
And was there a bar there so you could have a drink? Was drinking okay?
Yes, that's
okay.
right.
Right.
In fact, as a former member of the board, I had to be vetted by the state commission of whatever it's called to get the license.
And probably there was an initiation and monthly dues. Not that I expect you to remember that, but
of
I'm
course.
sure there was.
I remember
right?
it all. It was practically a second home for me.
Yeah. When you bought a drink or had lunch, could you run a tab, or did you pay as you go? Do you remember how that worked?
Sure. The way it worked was there was a house boy, he was called, or there was an employee who provided the mixings, and there were lockers. The lockers, each member was assigned a locker, and he or she, and later she, that's where they put their liquor.
Right.
And we mixed our own drinks.
Yeah. How long was the club in business, I guess you would say?
From 1961 till about, good question, probably about 85.
So it had a pretty good
longer,
run.
Maybe almost 90, perhaps 90.
So it had 25 years, give or take, huh?
At least 25, and maybe more like 30.
What was the demise?
The demise was the same everywhere. It happened in the city as well. Imagine all those clubs, and there were bundles of them in the financial district or near it. There were two things that happened. One was that the tax laws changed, and so companies, firms, law firms and others could not write off the induction fee and monthly fees for their employees to be members of these clubs.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing was that the female city attorney who disapproved of men-only clubs decided that, or sex-only, because there were female-only clubs too.
Mm-hmm.
The Metropolitan and the Francesca come to mind. She determined that that if you were a single-sex organization, you couldn't rent your facility or lease it to anyone else, as most of the clubs, but not the very top clubs, did. A club like the Pacific Union Club didn't have to have that income, but many others did. And so they were killed off. But we still do have the Bohemian Club and the Pacific Union Club and the Family,
mm-hmm.
and maybe a few others, but not many. Oh, the Concordia Club.
Mm-hmm.
But the middle range clubs didn't last.
Did women try to get involved in the Bombay Bicycle Club?
They did, and they were successful, and they made great contributions.
Right.
As they have to the Rotary Club,
Yeah.
where the same thing occurred.
Uh-huh. Speaking of Rotary, you were about, 55 years in now with the Rotary, Burlingame Rotary?
It's
55?
true.
55?
Well, maybe more closer to 50. I think I came in 1971.
Okay, because I think you're one of the senior members, if not the senior member.
I am, in fact, the senior member,
Yeah.
although Ted Kurtznet was very close to me.
And past president, of course.
That's
Why did you join Rotary, not Lions or Kiwanis or the others? What made you lean towards Rotary?
Do you know what they say about the difference between and among those three clubs?
No.
The Kiwanians build the city. The Lions run the city. And the Rotarians own the city.
Oh my gosh!
So when I was invited by someone who
was your sponsor? Who sponsored you into Rotary?
A guy named Harry Boyle, son of a former mayor of Hillsborough, and Harry met me along with the woman who got me involved in Burlingame at all at a party once in the late 60s, maybe 1969.
Yeah.
And there was a kind of a membership drive going on, and he thought that he could see that I could stand up without falling over.
Yeah.
So he invited me to join.
And what did he do? What was his occupation?
He was a salesman
Uh-huh.
and a very successful salesman, a very
Right.
persuasive man.
Yeah.
And you know, the Rotary Club and the Bombay Club worked together so well because they were almost interlocking directorates. So many of the men, and it was all men in those days, at the Rotary Club were also members of the Bombay Club.
Yeah.
And they were the people who not only owned but ran the town, as far as I could see. There was always a city council member or two who belonged to the Lions, but it was mostly Rotarians.
Yeah. I can remember Duffy Offield
Yes.
took me to an event there one evening, and it was all the and I wish I could remember all of them, but it was the owners of the car dealerships on Auto Row, like Joe Arata was there, and Mike Harvey, of course, and God, there was some other guys, some great names though that are part of Burlingame history.
Yes, Dan Mento was a member.
Right, exactly.
Former president of the Rotary Club and of the Bombay Club.
And they all talked, and God, I wish I could remember this. Anyway, it was just a wonderful evening to listen to those guys talk about their dealerships and what was going on.
I felt the same way. And you know, I you haven't asked me, but I have to answer nevertheless, because people always do. What made you a really lowly instructor at College of San Mateo, just out of graduate school, what made you want to be a member of the Bombay Club and the Rotary Club? And I will tell you now what that was. I had tremendous respect for my colleagues at the college. They were brilliant. Many of them had PhDs, as I do not, and deserved their PhDs. But there was a kind of sameness about their attitudes, and all members of the ACLU, all Democrats, all anti-McGovern, all pro-McGovern. And I just felt that it wasn't good for me to be in that kind of environment. I needed to expand a bit. And that's what I did. And I'm so glad I did, because those events and those people that I met were terrific. So many of them are characters that will never be forgotten.
Yeah. Okay, as a bachelor that you are, do you do any cooking at home, or do you mostly go out for lunch or breakfast, lunch, or dinner?
Archie Offield, my first landlord, forbade me to do any cooking. He was, I think, afraid of fire, and he just didn't like it. And
really?
And you have to remember, in those days, landlords had a lot of sway. They could do whatever they wanted to.
A lot of clout.
Well, it didn't hurt me badly, because I never was very much interested in cooking.
Okay.
So I haven't done any much cooking. My stove is used once a year by the caterers who come to cater my Christmas party.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, so you like to go to Burlingame Avenue then to have a lunch or dinner?
Yeah, and also San Mateo. In the early days, that was where you went. You went to the York, you went to the Villa Chartier, or the Lanai next door to it, owned by the same man.
Great places.
Emerson Murphy.
Great places.
I could tell you anecdotes about those guys.
Yeah.
They were terrific.
I bet.
They really had a lot of style.
All right, so I have a friend coming to town next week, and you're going to take him to lunch or dinner. Where are you going to take him? In Burlingame. I want to talk exclusively Burlingame right now. I know there's great places in San Mateo and elsewhere, but if you're taking somebody to lunch or dinner next week, where are you taking them?
That's a very good question. It's not easy. The Indian place on Park Road, which for a while had 2 Michelin stars.
Really?
It was called Raza. Is now a more earthbound restaurant, but it's also pretty good still. In fact, very good. Same owner.
Yeah.
He got a little tired of just a 24-hour job to keep those 2 stars.
Yeah, I bet.
But by the way, having 2 Michelin stars, I don't know how much all of our listeners are aware of this. That is an accomplishment.
That's a big
that
accomplishment.
is really big
Right.
time.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if you missed Raza. It was a terrific restaurant, and the replacement is nice too. I have taken some of my classmates whom I still see from college. Now we go there, and they enjoyed it a lot. Another place that I go is a restaurant that improved tremendously over the years, and that's Il Fornaio. Il Fornaio is in a space that is just terrific. To use a phrase that I heard once when I was in college, it sets up well for you.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you feel good.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty place, and the food is not bad at all.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're very busy.
The bartenders are tremendously friendly. Might take them there.
Yeah, and that's very much within walking distance of
indeed.
your apartment.
Almost rolling distance. Almost somersaulting.
That's for sure. Okay, so we'll move away from Burlingame. Wait. How about some of the changes that are going on right now? Like we have a brand new, or they're building the, what's that called? Where the post office was. It's going to be the community center.
Yes, indeed.
Then we have the old recreation department that's been rebuilt.
Yes.
Are you pleased with seeing all the building that's going on? Town Square is what I was searching for.
Oh, good.
Building the Town Square.
Yes.
That's a big, tall, probably going to be Burlingame's tallest building. Are you good with all of that thing? All of these things that are going on?
I'm 81 years old. Guess.
You're okay with it?
No, guess what an 81-year-old feels about change.
Oh, no,
that is
you're pretty
unanticipated.
flexible. You're pretty flexible.
I'm apprehensive. How's that sound?
Apprehensive. Okay, right. Okay. We'll move away from all of that for a minute. Let's go to your career. Your 35 years at College of San Mateo?
That's correct.
Yeah. And you know what, Mike? We're 30 minutes into this interview, and you haven't even brought up that you're a Stanford grad, and I really can't believe that, because usually 10 minutes into a conversation, I get the Stanford bomb dropped.
You know what
Stanford
men say? They say, you always know a Harvard man because he tells you so before.
That's correct. Well, I think that you guys
before
are
you've
the
taken
same
off
way.
your hat.
Okay, so 35 years at the College of San Mateo,
yes.
And you sort of split that career in half, correct? Teaching,
yes, true.
And administration,
yes.
right?
Yes.
What did you teach?
English. Composition.
Yeah, that would be 100 or 101, whatever they call it. 1A, is that what it's called?
1A and 1B and the preparatory courses.
Yeah.
But mostly, what we used to call remedial English. I taught that. I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved the students in those classes. And I also lectured to the public on philosophy, art, literature, film.
When you say you lectured to the public, was that done at the College of San Mateo or
Yes.
elsewhere?
Yes, at night in fee-based programs. I didn't do that for very long because I became an administrator soon after that. But it was a very rewarding and pleasant event.
Yeah. So
I did one of the first courses on Hitchcock, on Alfred Hitchcock, the director.
Really?
That was ever
I bet
done.
that was terrific.
It was great fun.
Yeah. In all the years that you taught kids English and writing, did anybody ever have an article or something published that you know of? Did anybody go on to do anything special that you know of? I don't know.
One of my students comes to mind, but there may be others. I'm sure there are others. But the one that comes to mind is a naturalized American citizen who came from Hungary, and she is a translator of Hungarian literature.
Really?
And she does a good job.
Wow.
Multiple publications.
Why did you move to administration? Why did you leave teaching to go to administration?
A couple of reasons, and I will say, let me just say, it's going to be fragmentary, but if you ever want to know more about it, I will tell you. We were not trained to teach. There was you had to have a credential, but if it was basically assumed in the olden days that if you had a master's degree in English, you knew how to write, and which is not true necessarily, and that you knew how to teach writing, which was definitely not true. So I had a hard time in the early going.
You had a hard time teaching, is what
That's
you're
right.
saying?
It wasn't entirely satisfying to me. When I returned, for the last 10 years of my career, I taught again. I was granted a sabbatical, and I went to San Francisco State and took the courses for their composition certificate, which were just a revelation to me, and I loved teaching for the last 10 years of my life. In fact, I would have taught more, but I came down with rheumatoid arthritis and couldn't correct the papers.
Really?
Since then, I've had a recovery, but I was out by then.
Did you have any assistants helping you with anything like that?
Yes,
Did they have
in
assistants
fact,
back then?
The district, the college was very generous,
Yeah.
provided me with graduate students to do the grading.
Yeah.
In fact, this is the sort of thing that beginning teachers sometimes dream of, and I was one of them who did. Graders who will do the only thing that's hard, really onerous burden of teaching at the college level is what's called the paper load, and you have a tremendous number of papers to correct. And correcting papers is fun for the first 5 or 6, but if you've got a bushel basket full of them, it's not as much fun. And you think, oh, if I could just have somebody do this for me, all I would have to do is plan my lessons, teach my students, meet with them in interviews and conferences, and what a wonderful life that would be. Well, it was my life because my illness made it necessary, and the college was very generous and provided me with extremely capable readers.
Yeah.
They're called readers. And the problem is that you can't teach writing if you're not reading their work with the eye of a reader.
Right. So speaking of that, kids that are writing compositions, essays, etc., sometimes the content is really good and their thinking is really good, but the punctuation might be sloppy or the spelling is sloppy. But they had good content. Their essays were meaningful, right? Is there a way that you could help them with that? In other words, would you help them with their grammar, or how would you aid a student like that you know was a good writer, but they couldn't quite put the semicolon or the colon in the right spot or the comma, the spelling was sloppy? How do you help somebody like that?
I think I'm going to answer you there are 2 answers, and I'll give you one of them.
Okay.
You can't divorce content from form. A writer who has a poor grasp of grammar, spelling, all the punctuation, all the rest of it, cannot express him or herself sufficiently well to enable us to make a judgment about their content. They need to work on both. It isn't possible to write a paper, an academic paper anyway, that has merit without its being carefully constructed.
Okay.
So that's one answer. Second answer is that every writing teacher who is worth his or her salt has to work on both sides at the same time. And I'm sorry to say this because I have great respect for my fellow teachers, but I'm afraid that many of my students, when they got to classes at the college, had been cheated. They had never been told and never demonstrated to them that they were incompetent in the formal way.
Right. And then they got passed along, is what you're saying?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Going back a little bit now, the beginning of your career teaching, did you go to CSM right after Stanford? Was there anything in between that?
Yes, there was. There was a master's degree. I determined when I graduated that I was going to get a job, and the only thing I knew anything about was English. So I went to San Francisco State to get a credential, and at the same time I got a master's degree. And San Francisco State was the right place to go because they were well fixed to place their students. And I was also very fortunate because colleges were opening all over the Bay Area, all over the country perhaps. Cañada had not opened yet, but Skyline was on the verge of opening. There was a demand for English teachers, and I was there.
What year were you at CSM? When did you begin that career?
68.
68. That's a beautiful college.
Oh, I was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Yes, it is a beautiful college, and it still is, and it's been changed quite a bit, as you probably know, but quite well. So there it is.
When you left teaching and went into administration, what does that mean? What's administration? What did you do?
Well, what's administration? It's the stuff that doesn't involve teaching, that does involve everything but teaching.
Were you in the office though, the main main office building up there?
Yes, I was. I was initially. Imagine trying to answer the phone with this title. I was the acting assistant dean of instruction for evening and summer sessions.
Oh my goodness!
Can you imagine? Hi, it's Mike Kimball here, acting assistant dean of instruction for evening and summer sessions. Yeah. By the time I'd get finished introducing myself, everybody would be asleep.
Oh boy!
So I did that. I did all kinds of administrative jobs. I was in charge of community services for a while. I was responsible for the library. That was learning resources, et cetera, et cetera.
So did the general manager position, was that a spin-off of the administration, or how'd that come about? The general manager position of KCSM, TV&FM. How did that come about?
Short form. The district was, the elected trustees, were worried that the broadcasting program, especially the television program, was costing the taxpayers too much money. And so they decided that they were going to appoint a citizens committee to evaluate the fiscal health of the broadcasting program. And I applied to my predecessor, a very capable broadcaster and tremendously brilliant fellow named Stuart Chaffee, Harvard Law graduate. Now, see, I'm using Harvard.
Yes, you are.
It's somebody else's
Yes,
Harvard.
you
are. Had just left for greener pastures. And so without much of an alternative, they appointed me.
Okay. And how long were you the GM up there, general manager for that?
A little more than 3 years.
Okay, let's talk about that for a minute, because I think you have some interesting stories to tell, anecdotes, okay? First of all, is the station a student-run station, totally student-run?
Oh, that's a good question. There are basically two kinds of stations. First thing we have to do is separate television from radio. These are two separate operations.
Great.
But if you think about a radio station or a television station, for that matter, with a license held by a public body, especially an academic body. Santa Monica has a very successful radio station, etc. Santa Monica City College.
Yep.
If you have an academic governance board, then you have a choice between using your license to generate revenue or using it to teach beginners.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're using it to teach beginners, it's very hard. It does happen, but it's very difficult to get the audience to contribute. They assume that this is an educational program and that they assume that it's supported, fiscally supported by the institution, just as any other academic program. However, if you're in the fourth largest market in the country, as we were, you have an option, and that is to establish a format which appeals to sufficient portion of that vast catchment area and support itself that way.
So is that how KCSM Jazz was born? Because I think there's actual personalities or talent on those in that station, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. That's not. Now there are students. Students have access to. They are involved in a broadcasting situation that is fully professional.
Yeah.
And that's a learning experience.
Right.
But they aren't doing it. They aren't on air.
Yeah. They're not on air.
No.
Yeah, the talent is on air, I guess, right?
That's correct. And that was a decision we made.
Yeah.
Even a few months before I became general manager, when it was still in the makings.
So let me ask you this. You can still get KCSM Jazz, no problem, on the radio. Just boom, 91.1, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah. Is KCSM TV still happening?
No, it was sold a couple of years ago.
It was, right.
So they did what they were threatening to do back in 1985, or approximately, when I came on board.
Yeah.
My 3 years were devoted to helping the Citizens Committee determine whether they should be retained, and that was the answer was affirmative at that time. But things had changed a great deal by a couple of years ago.
Yeah. What kind of experiences you have up there? How many people were you general manager of?
Probably 40 or 50. I will tell you the experience. I'll tell you what it was like.
Yeah.
Every afternoon, every employee of those stations believed that William Paley had called.
William Paley being the president of CBS, correct? Yeah.
To appoint him or her the anchor of the 6 o'clock news.
Great.
And the only reason they had not received that message was my incompetence.
Oh, boy.
That's what it was like.
Oh, every day.
Every day.
3 years of that, huh?
3 years was plenty for them and for me.
Yeah.
But I will add that every single one of them was terrifically professional at their work. I mean, they were spot on. And I will say this, too. There was long ago, before you and I were thought of, there was a visionary member of the electronics program at College of San Mateo. His name was Jacob Weens, who in the early 50s filled out a form, might have taken him half an hour, to acquire the bandwidth for those two stations. They were available. FM was not on most radio dials. Nobody cared about it.
Right.
He applied for the FM.
Boy, that's vision.
That's a visionary fellow.
What was his name again?
Jacob Weens.
Yeah. Gosh, that's crazy.
He was the father of it all.
Yeah, boy. Do you still listen to KCSM Jazz? Do you listen to it at all?
I don't listen to it as much. I'm a big jazz fan.
Right.
That's why I
Are there
changed.
any personalities still up there from when you were there? I know that was several years ago, but have they all moved on?
Most of them have, and some have died. I'm sorry to say. Pat Henry, who was the owner of K-Jazz, worked for us for years.
Yeah.
John Rogers, very well known. Times have changed. Jazz has changed.
Yeah, it certainly has.
I have a lot of records, and I'm happy.
Soft jazz seems to be coming into a lot of the stations now, which I don't know how to describe soft jazz, but that's what I'll say, okay?
Yeah, good.
Okay. Let's go back to your English teaching days.
Oh, please.
All right, because I got a couple of questions for you.
Oh, good. Sure. Shoot.
Then or then? Than or then? What's the difference?
Well, the difference is that some people read and some people don't. And if you're not a reader, you're often think because then and thou sound the same.
Yes, they do.
When spoken, that you're.
When do you use it? When do I use then, and when do I use THAN, or when do I use THEN? Is there like what's the rule?
They have no resemblance to each other, so it shouldn't be. I think that most readers. I'll answer your question, but I think most people who have trouble with that don't have trouble with the meanings. They just think they mean the same thing.
Yeah.
And than is a time word or comparison word.
Okay.
Bigger than, smaller than, later than, earlier than. Then is a word about time past.
Then, okay.
That's then, THEN.
Right.
And than is a comparison word.
Okay. That helps.
Yeah.
Comma or semicolon? When do you put a comma in there? Why do they use a semicolon? What's that about?
People have trouble with a semicolon, and I'm not quite sure why. It's really quite simple. If you have a complete sentence, if you have two complete sentences, you can link them with a semicolon.
Why wouldn't you just use a period and start over?
You can do that, except that if you're involved in an intricate series, if you're thinking in a complex way, it's sometimes helpful to join two thoughts and then make a full separation that indicates a separation not only in space but in thought.
Yeah.
But
okay.
So a semicolon is correct.
Okay.
But only if both sides are complete sentences.
Yeah.
Or as we would say, because they aren't complete sentences, they are independent clauses. The other reason you use a semicolon is that you may have a series like this. Michael Kimball, comma, 1214 Burlingame Avenue, comma, Burlingame, semicolon. Mark Lucchese, 1412 Elm Drive, West Covina, California. All those commas, when you're putting items that have internal commas together, semicolons are what separate them.
Okay. I think I'll bring you good content, but I'll have some problems with the grammar and the punctuation, so I know that I have to connect all the dots there. Okay, that was interesting. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that. Okay. My brother and I are coming to your home or house for dinner. My brother and me are coming to your home or house for dinner. Which is correct there?
Sometimes we get confused because of the my brother part. We wouldn't say me is coming to your house.
Right.
We'd say I am coming to your house.
Okay.
The addition of the brother doesn't change anything. I and my brother are coming to your house.
Okay. When do you use the me? You just don't?
Oh, no. You use it when it's the object of the preposition. So I'm giving a present to you. You're giving a present to me.
Okay.
You wouldn't say, I'm giving a present to he. You would say to him. Because, you see, there are two families of these words, of pronouns. There's the whom family and the who family. Mm-hmm. And if you know which ones belong together, they're like the McCoys and the whatever the others were. They're at constant battle.
Yeah.
The Hatfields and the McCoys.
Well, that's interesting because my next one was when do you use who and whom? So who is coming to dinner? Whom is coming to dinner?
Well, who belongs to the family that includes I, we, and not me, and not him or her.
Okay.
So if you know that the hims, the hers, and the me's belong to the whom family, and that the he's and she's and I's belong to the who family, then just recast the phrase in your mind till you can hear it correctly. Because remember, they are deadly enemies, these two families of words. Any phrase or sentence that has a who will not in that place have a him.
Wow. Okay. I gotta have to digest that a little bit. We'll replay this later, and I'll listen to it and see if I can't break that down. But that was that was great. Okay, finally, anecdote or story? What's the difference?
Anecdote.
Anecdote. Excuse me. Anecdote.
Now there is a common mistake that says that an antidote, which is something that you use to correct, especially a physical condition, an antidote is not an anecdote, because an anecdote is a little story. A little tale.
Okay. Great.
So you've been telling anecdotes all your life, and you have been taking antidotes for your illnesses.
Oh, I knew this was going to be great. Oh, boy. Professor Kimball, Michael, thank you for being on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. You're a terrific... You obviously studied this stuff.
I don't know if I studied or not, but...
You did a great job. Thank a professor. You were well taught at Long Beach State.
Thank you for the plug for Long Beach State. Thank you, Michael Kimball. I'd like to thank Mike Kimball, retired professor and former general manager of KCSM TV and FM, for being my guest today on Burlingame. It's a small town podcast sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. Thanks to Kathy and Shelby Lucchese for editing and producing, the great Ray Tyler for video. Original music by Bray. You can hear more of Bray at braymusic.com. This podcast was recorded on Friday, January 12th, 2024 at the Burlingame Library. The Burlingame Historical Society copyrights this recording, and no part can be copied or replayed without the permission of the Burlingame Historical Society. So until next time, everyone, see you around Burlingame. It's a small town.